Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome those who are coming before the Economic Matters Committee. Welcome to our committee. Today is Tuesday, February 17th, our 1 p.m. bill hearings. We have 6 bills on our docket. I would like to let those know, except for the legislators, those who will be testifying before us, you have 2 minutes. You will be timed. If the timer should catch you, we ask that you summarize and wrap up, not continue through your pages with your testimony. For those who have provided written testimony, know that it is in our files and we will review them in addition to your oral testimony if you submitted both. With that said, we will begin with House Bill 135. Delegate Schindler, if you have a panel, you may bring them up with you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, esteemed members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Matthew J. Schindler, and I'm here to present House Bill 135. House Bill 135 would enable county and municipal governments to establish tax incremental financing districts in non-contiguous areas. Tax incremental financing districts, better known as TIFs, is an economic development tool that's created when development or redevelopment projects are going to create additional tax revenues by increasing property value in a designated area. The jurisdiction can then issue bonds to pay for improvements for public infrastructure, such as roads, parking, and stormwater management. The issued bonds can then be repaid through the incremental increase in tax revenue that the project will generate. TIFs are used all over the country and have been implemented in multiple projects across the state, such as Mondawan Mall, Frankfurt Estates in Baltimore City, Park Place in Annapolis, and the Route 36 Strip Mall in Frostburg. In these projects, TIF districts were limited to one specific geographic area for redevelopment. HB 135 would simply allow jurisdictions to implement TIFs that may not be geographically contiguous, which would assist in various types of redevelopment efforts. Blight and economic depression are not limited to a single zip code, and neither should the economic tools needed to revitalize our communities. TIF districts are a direct way in which local jurisdictions can create private-public partnerships to increase property values, create jobs, and holistically rejuvenate our communities. This simple change to allow TIF districts to be established in a non-contiguous manner will enable local jurisdictions to have greater ability to implement redevelopment projects and promote economic growth. Therefore, I ask for a favorable report for HB 135.
Awesome. All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Charlotte Fleckenstein, Legislative Services Assistant with MACO, testifying today in support of House Bill 135. This bill is a much welcome modernization tool to the TIF framework. As the delegate mentioned, currently this would require TIF districts to be in geographically contiguous areas, but our on-the-ground conditions have shown that blight and vacant properties actually tend to be much more scattered and don't tend to cluster neatly together. Ultimately, this legislation would bolster the ability of local governments to address blight, attract reinvestment, and advance revitalization efforts in a locally driven way. And importantly, it does so within pre-existing administrative and fiscal approval frameworks. So as such, MACO is respectfully urging a favorable report on House Bill 135. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in strong support of House Bill 135. This is a critically important bill. You've heard the good work that we're hoping to do with it. I'll just say it was explained well, me too.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members, good afternoon. I'm Mike Posco. Excuse me. I'm the CEO for Habitat for Humanity of the Chesapeake. I'm here to express support for HB 135 to create non-contiguous area TIFs, which seeks to address areas in need of revitalization in the state. Habitat for Humanity is a leading provider of affordable home ownership opportunities in Central Maryland. Since our founding 45 years ago, we have renovated and built hundreds of homes in 26 communities across Baltimore City, Baltimore, Anne Arundel County, and Howard counties. This year, we are active in construction and pre-development in several neighborhoods in Baltimore City, also projects in Severn and Columbia. These include both new construction and intensive rehabilitation of long-awaited vacant homes. We support the goal of creating another tool for counties throughout Maryland to use to invest in underinvested areas. We applaud the chance to have more homeownership units in these efforts and invite the chance for those to include homeownership affordability. Please support this proposal to create another tool for development in key areas within the state, adding the flexibility of non-contiguous units to areas to use as our toolbox. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Delegate Chi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to ECM. I remember hearing you present this bill last year, the Ways and Means. Could you explain, first of all, I love the bill, that's why I'm co-sponsoring it. But could you, yeah, move favorable. But could you explain why it did not move last year? Because there's no opposition. Did we run out of time, or was it ever voted on?
Yeah, I believe it was simply a matter of running out of time. It did pass through the House. It got stalled in the Senate, but right now it is on second reader in the Senate. So
Okay,
we expect that to pass through this week. So
Wonderful.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. Thank you very much, Delegate Schindler. We do have one more favorable. It's a virtual. Joseph Meyerhoff. Nope. Okay, he's not with us. So that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 135. We'll now move on to House Bill 179. Delegate Vogel, is he here? He is not here. Is Delegate Stewart here? He is not here as well. We're going to jump to Delegate Boafo. House Bill 470. You should have a bill every day, Delegate Boafo.
Oh, that was very funny, Delegate Queen. That was a good joke.
Yes, please.
All right. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues on the House Economic Matters Committee, for the record, Delegate Adrian Boafo here to present House Bill, and I am here, Delegate Queen, to present House Bill 470. You all have heard this bill before last year as we brought it to this committee last year, but this bill creates a digital asset task force, a digital asset and blockchain technology task force. It brings together state agencies, industry experts, and academic researchers to advise Maryland on how to use these technologies responsibly. I do want to note for the committee that I have amended this bill to ensure that key financial regulators are at the table by adding the state treasurer, the securities commissioner, or their designees to the task force. As you all know, blockchain and digital asset technologies are advancing quickly throughout the country and here in our state. They're already being used to process payments, strengthen cybersecurity, improve supply chains, support digital identity, and modernize government record keeping. And here in Maryland, we're already seeing real use cases. In Baltimore City, in fact, blockchain technology is being used to modernize how the city keeps track of property ownership. With technology advancing this quick, Maryland cannot afford to be left behind. We have the tools, we have the expertise, and frankly, we need the coordinated way to put these tools to work. HB 470 creates a clear process for experts to work alongside state government and advise us on how to use these technologies to grow our economy, protect consumers, and position Maryland as a pro-innovation capital here in the United States. Since this bill was introduced last year, the Maryland Blockchain Association, who is here today, and I want to thank them for their leadership, has already brought together industry leaders, researchers, and state partners through a public-private partnership task force to begin said work. HB 470 formalizes that effort to ensure that the right stakeholders are involved, the process is transparent, and the recommendations are accountable. And with that, Madam Chair, I will urge this committee a favorable report.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of the Maryland General Assembly. My name is Mickey Chandra. I'm an economist, an educator, and a proud Maryland resident. Today, I'm here as an advocate for innovation, for economic growth, and for the future of our state. Since July 2025, I've served on the Maryland Blockchain Association's Task Force on Blockchain and Innovation Technology. We are not theorists or hobbyists. We are Maryland businesses, educators, technologists, and community leaders working together in a public-private partnership to responsibly integrate emerging technology into our local economy. And let me bring this home. I live in Montgomery County. In our community and across Maryland, I see real bottlenecks, regulatory backlogs, inefficient systems, costly administrative processes. Blockchain at its core is simply a secure, decentralized digital ledger. It allows us to map processes, eliminate inefficiencies, increase transparency, and strengthen enforcement where it matters. I see 3 clear opportunities. First, low-hanging fruit. We can use blockchain to fix existing systems that already struggle to serve our residents and businesses. This is about improving what we already do. Second, unlocking potential. We can use blockchain to track hazardous waste safely, protect sensitive populations like children, and better document student learning progress. These are practical, immediate applications. And third, and this one's the fun one, building towards higher goals. We can position Maryland as a leader in mission-driven innovation, attracting investment, supporting startups, empowering academia, and creating better livelihood for all Marylanders. Blockchain is no longer emerging, it is here. Other states are moving. The question is whether Maryland will lead or follow. That when our citizens and businesses need what we need now is a signal, a vote of confidence that Maryland recognizes this opportunity and intends to approach it thoughtfully and strategically. That first step is the establishment of the official Maryland Digital Asset and Blockchain Technology Task Force. This is not about hype, it is about preparation, it is about economic competitiveness, and it is about giving Marylanders the tools to thrive in the next chapter of innovation. I respectfully ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here in support of the Maryland Digital Asset and Blockchain Task Force Bill, HB 470. My name is Anastasia Delaccio, and I am the Executive Director of the Digital Chamber State Network. The Digital Chamber is the world's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization committed to promoting principled and equitable digital asset policy. We launched the state network in 2025 to advocate for thoughtful and transformative digital asset policies in state and local government. The Digital Chamber represents over 250 companies, including stablecoin issuers, digital asset firms, national banks, blockchain analytics firms, custodians, tokenization platforms, and companies building core blockchain infrastructure. Many of these industry leaders have employees and users here in Maryland. As federal digital asset policy continues to evolve, the states are where the rules of the road are being paved. Maryland is home to many innovative companies and consumers and has a timely opportunity to position itself as a responsible leader that is embracing this innovative financial future. Blockchain studies and task forces such as this offer a low-risk, low-cost, and transparent pathway to policymaking, particularly around this new area of finance that is highly technical and complex. They allow lawmakers to build internal expertise, compare approaches across jurisdictions, learn from industry, and assess practical applications before committing public resources or adapting rules that become entrenched. The findings of this task force can serve as a foundation for future legislative and executive action, whether that includes authorizing pilot programs and sandboxes, establishing regulatory frameworks, or advancing targeted applications that can make Maryland government more efficient, such as digital identity systems, supply chain tracking, or modernization of land and property records. We recommend the task force focus on 4 areas. 1, legal clarity for digital assets under Maryland commercial law. 2, appropriate scope of money transmission and custody rules.
Ms.
3,
Delaccio, if you could summarize.
Sure. 3, stablecoins payments, and 4, practical government, most of which all of this is outlined in my written testimony. I'll conclude by saying this task force will provide Maryland with clear implementation-ready guidance, which will serve to strengthen the state's economic competitiveness, workforce, and how its resources are deployed. For these reasons, I respectfully urge support for HB 376 and HB 470. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. For the record, Andrew Zirkle here on behalf of the Maryland Tech Council. I'd like to thank the chair, the vice chair, and the whole of the committee for this opportunity to testify today in support of House Bill 470. The Maryland Tech Council represents over 850 life science and technology firms that operate in and across the state of Maryland. The reason why we like House Bill 470 is it takes a thoughtful and structured approach to understanding digital asset and blockchain technology. We appreciate the fact that the task force brings together all the relevant stakeholders, including elected officials, state agencies, experts, academics, and those in the industry to collaboratively evaluate the regulatory landscape and make sure we are ready for this technology. Blockchain and digital assets are rapidly evolving sectors, and we've seen that they have the potential in states that accommodate them to drive economic growth, attract substantial private investment, and create high-quality jobs. As these technologies continue to mature, Maryland should be at the forefront in attracting companies and talent in this space. And additionally, the support provided by this task force demonstrates that as a state, we are at the forefront in supporting emergent technology sectors. It's for these reasons that the Tech Council respectfully asks for your support on House Bill 470. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with Delegate Queen and then Delegate Chi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sponsor, for bringing this bill. Very forward-thinking. Just wanted to confirm that you are going to entertain all of the favorable amendments to add other participants. Specifically, I think the credit union wants division between credit union and bankers, so more than just one financial services representative. And the Office of Attorney General also asked for representatives. Will you entertain both?
Yeah, so I will speak to the Office of the Attorney General. I think that makes a lot of complete sense. Delegate, as you know, sometimes when we form task force, we often have way too many people in the room in terms of just it kind of becomes overburdenous. My concern with the credit folks being a part of this, not saying that I wouldn't be open to an amendment, but we got to remember that this technology is decentralized. It's not like traditional banking. And we want the folks who actually understand the technology to be in the room and have that discussion. I think every Marylander and frankly the credit unions will also have a chance to give input as we look at deploying some of these technologies throughout state government. But I'm not necessarily convinced, I can be convinced, but I'm not necessarily convinced at this moment that it makes sense for them to be on this particular task force. But they will, like every other Marylander, have valuable insight.
Delegate Chi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at all the witnesses, and I realize I noticed that there's a letter from the State Treasurer's Office. I assume this would fall under the responsibility of OFR, right?
Yes.
In terms of regulatory oversight. So
Yes.
I'm sure are they aware of this bill, and what is their attitude on this?
And, you know, we haven't spoke to them, Delegate, about this bill in particular. I think last year they came in informational only as well when we brought this forth. But remember, this is just a task force to evaluate how we can make life simpler through state government work for our constituents. But we haven't had conversations with OFR on this bill in particular. There will be a bill that I'm doing in a few weeks that we will have more discussion about OFR with, but not on this one in particular, because again, it's just a task force.
Thank you.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. So Delegate Queen asked the question, and in your response, you said something along the lines of deploying technologies in Maryland. So the lead into the task force as to what comes out of it. What type of technologies are you expecting to be deployed in the state of Maryland related to blockchain? And I have to assume that's why you want to put the task force in place.
Yeah, I'll give you the one example that I used in my testimony, Delegate.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, you're fine. We've seen through Baltimore City how they've been able to use blockchain technology to really evaluate vacant properties that exist throughout the city of Baltimore, which is a unique and specific issue to that city. I think the task force is going to have to work with industry partners to figure out, especially as this technology develops, where can we continue to find ways where we can be using this technology to make life easier for Maryland residents. One thing that I'm particularly interested in, because there's a lot of conversation around the MVA and the work we're doing there, we're seeing this happen in Wisconsin as well, is how can we make the MVA process a lot easier for Marylanders? And I think we probably could do that through blockchain technology, but again, would want a task force to really evaluate where there are segments of government in which we can have these technologies deployed.
Great, thanks.
I don't see any further questions for your panel. Thank you, Delegate Boffo.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have a virtual for favorable, Jacqueline Cooper.
I'm unable to start the video. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the House Economics Committee. My name is Jacqueline Cooper. I serve as the CEO of the Maryland Blockchain Association and also founder of the Blockchain Legal Institute. And I'm here today to urge the favorable report on HB 470. Maryland is currently at a defining crossroads as we watch neighboring states compete for the dominance of the digital asset sector. Maryland has the opportunity to move beyond mere observation and establish itself as a permanent global hub for blockchain innovation, workforce development, and consumer support. One of the things that I've learned over the past 10 years in being in the blockchain space, both as an attorney as well as in the education space, is the need to stay up to date with the technology and how it can be applied to both the workforce development area as well as the economic growth area. With the passage of the task force, it will allow us to be able to continue to research what the technologies are and how they can be applied within our state to support the economic development. So with that, I would like to also suggest that the various players that have asked to be on the task force be allowed, because each of the entities in those niches are also learning about these areas, and they also need to be a part of the conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Because of my being involved within the space, I'm currently at a conference in Denver related to this technology. And so throughout the travels that I've done around the globe, I'm bringing back this information to our state so we can grow and support our own community. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. I see no questions for you. Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now move on to favorable with amendments. We have Rory Murray and Evan Richards.
Hurt my feelings. Good afternoon, Rory Murray here on behalf of the Maryland DC Credit Union Association. Represent the 65 credit unions and their 2.3 million members in the state of Maryland. Contrary to popular belief, we're very much in the digital asset, crypto, blockchain world. I've been working on this policy for about 8 years now on the federal level. The simplest way to put it is whether it's running through a regulated and supervised financial institution or running parallel to a regulated and supervised financial institution, any sort of digital currency and some blockchain technology is inherently intertwined with the standardized financial institutions market. We have a lot of information to provide about best practices of what currently works in the market, but also we have a different view than a lot of the digital currency companies because we are regulated and supervised by either the federal or the state governments. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. Currently, the task force has one member of the financial services industry. The only reason we would want it specifically to say one credit union member and one banking member is because we have different organizational structures, we have different risk perspectives, and we have different consumer bases. So we would love, if we're going to move forward with the task force, that we bring both of those voices to the table, see what lessons learned come out of it. We're not trying to take over anybody's task force, but it, from our perspective, wouldn't make sense to miss half of the financial institutions in the state. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Evan Richards. I'm the head of government community relations for the Maryland Bankers Association. And I'll be brief because I think Roy did a really good job of why we should have more than one member of the financial services industry on the task force. You know, one of the main jobs of Maryland banks and credit unions, quite frankly, is to keep our customers safe. You know, and there's a lot of risk with implementing these new technologies. So we just want to make sure that we're able to keep our customers safe. And with that, we urge the committee to adopt an amendment that expands representation of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon. Members, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 470. We'll now circle back to House Bill 179. Delegate Vogel, if your panel's here, you can bring them up with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Grayson Wiggins, if you're watching this, come inside. Here he is. All right. Here with House Bill 179, which seeks to give us in the General Assembly more information as to where the delays in permitting and licensing are. I don't have to tell this committee how harmful those delays are to economic growth in the state. And I know there's been a number of efforts to address permitting delays, address licensing delays, but the reality is we can't fully address those unless we know where those delays are. So what this legislation does is create a complaint portal through the Department of Commerce. Commerce has said they can do this at no cost. And for applicants for a permit or a license, if it takes longer than 60 days to process that application, they can fill out the complaint form, and that will be tracked and then recorded into a report that is delivered to us, identifying where that delay is occurring, whether it is at a certain agency at the state level, whether it's at a county level, whether it's at a municipal level. And the reason it's also helpful is because the Department of Commerce, based on the conversations that I've had with them, they do have individuals on staff now who are responsible for helping address those delays and helping businesses navigate those delays. And this complaint portal would give them an ability to see where those delays were happening in real time and then support those businesses that are experiencing those delays. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 179.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. We were in full support of the bill. We thank Delegate Vogel for bringing it forward. You know, we talk to members constantly and businesses across the state who are experiencing issues with permitting timeframes. We've been encouraged by the work at the state level. I know the governor has a task force to look at the permitting times at the state level and some changes that can be made to streamline that process. But very candidly, a lot of the concerns that I hear from our members are based on permitting timeframes at the local level. And so this bill does allow a business to submit information when they experience that delay. I think Delegate Vogel mentioned it. This is a reintroduction bill. And last year when I testified in support of this bill, I told you all a story about a member of ours who's attempting to bring on 50 affordable housing units in Baltimore City, and they were delayed over a year at that point due to permit delays. They couldn't get the city to look at the permits and process the permits. That property is still not online. And so we're here a year later experiencing the same problems and the same issues. And, you know, whether it's a issue of the number of employees at the county level or just the number of applications being submitted, I'm unsure, but I think that this bill, which has no fiscal note at all, would be helpful in helping us illustrate the issue here for the state of Maryland. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before I take a quick question, what happened to your bill last year, Delegate Vogel?
It didn't pass out of this committee.
Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. Is this really for information only? You're trying to gather the information, or is there a penalty for not meeting it?
Thanks for the question, Delegate. There's no penalty, but it's to give us the information on where these delays are occurring, and also to give the Department of Commerce real-time information so that they can, if possible, intervene and support those businesses that are experiencing those delays.
Okay, so if a county fails to, let's say, meet the 60-day requirement, I can report that, and I guess MACO's coming out saying they're unfavorable for the bill. And I guess their pretense is that there's unexpected delays from not only the applicant, but from the county. And why would they be opposing the bill if it's just for information?
Delegate, I can't speak for them, but there is no penalty. It's really just for us to gather information. And again, the key to this is that if it's a one-off incident where there's a single delay with a county, sure, we might be able to explain that. But if there are recurring delays or patterns of delays, that should raise a question that, in partnership with MACO, we should look to answer moving forward.
So it's more customer service.
It's just an informational bill. It's just to share information. I'm surprised that MACO doesn't want to share the information. It makes me think that they don't want you all to have that information.
My experience is when you have a delay, it's usually because certain committees only meet once a month, and if you miss that, or if your guy misses this, that's where these delays come in. And I would think the counties are taking that into account already to sit back and say, when you have a problem getting a license, it might be because of the process. You might have missed some important data that need to be input at a certain time, and you missed that. You missed it 2 months in a row. Now you have a problem.
Potentially, but in my experience, it's more a situation where they can't get the county to respond to them.
Okay, thank you.
Before I take a couple more questions, I just want to welcome two of our GLEE members, Delegate Wu and Delegate Tomlinson, who are here for your bill. Delegate Vogel, though they missed your testimony, so you might want to catch up with them. We're going to move on to Delegate Rose and then Delegate Chi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow along a little bit for what Delegate Ahrens was just asking. So my concern would be, and I have not read MACO's testimony, I was just pulling it up. If this is going to be used to collect the data to then turn around and issue, go after from a state level to counties and have a heavy hand on, really basically county business. So while I understand delays and I think they're frustrating and all of that, my concern is this going to be used in the future, this database of information, of complaints, to then issue some sort of penalties, fines that's my concern.
Delegate, I think that's a great question. That's not my intent at all to penalize counties that might have delays. Look, if we want to grow Maryland's economy, we have to address these delays. And if there's a county that's struggling with these delays, that has an abnormal number of delays, then I think the Department of Commerce should work with that county to help address those delays and maybe help them streamline certain processes to prevent this from being an issue moving forward. I met with a business owner in, I'm not going to name the county, but who shared with me that they'd been waiting on a county permit for over 1.5 years, and they said they were ready to leave the state, not because of taxes or any other issue, but because they just could not get their business started in the state because of county permitting delays. So the state should know about that, because ultimately that hurts the state's economy. And again, this is not to impose any sort of penalty or fine on counties. Rather, let's all work together to address those delays, but we have to know those delays are happening. Also, I'll note, this is not just for counties. State agencies are also going to be required to report here, right? So if there's a state agency that is responsible for a large number of these delays, let's figure out why and try to address that issue.
Okay, I appreciate the answer. I guess my concern is really you say that's not the intent of the bill. I worry about the unintended consequences, and so this does give me concern that the gathered information would then come back with another bill that says if you don't do X, Y, or Z and straighten out, we're going to impose some sort of, major fine or have, more interference. We see it over and over again, so much state interference in local governance and planning and zoning and things of that nature, which this really falls under. So those are my big concerns.
I personally would not support that. I would want to see collaboration to address those delays. But for us to have that collaboration, again, we don't even know where the delays are happening right now. And this is a step in getting that information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Vogel, for bringing this very important bill. I always want to say that the cheapest way to incentivize business and commerce is to get ourselves out of the way of people doing business in Maryland, right? And so this is in that spirit. So I guess my question is whether this would essentially function as like, because you call it a portal, like an ombudsman kind of a function. Do we have something like this anywhere within the administration currently? Do you know? Like, where do people go otherwise to complain, other than complaining to the individual departments themselves?
So my understanding, and Grayson, feel free to jump in, is that the Department of Commerce has an individual who's now essentially filling that role and helping address those delays as they come up. The issue is, do businesses know that that person exists, and how do they get in touch with that person? So this complaint portal would allow them to obtain that information, right, and then provide that support as necessary. And also, moving beyond just the one-off cases, I think we're going to find patterns of delays through this report that I would love to then work with the Department of Commerce and the General Assembly to figure out how to support those counties and help address those delays. So yeah, I think there's two parts to it, and one addresses the concern that you raised.
Yeah, I understand that my colleagues' concern about local community decisions and all of that. But I think that if the goal is to identify patterns and to somehow summarize and share across the counties and all of that, I think it would be very important to our goal of removing barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate.
Delegate Tomlinson or Wu, do you have any questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Delegate Vogel. No further questions. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 179. We'll now move on to House Bill 317. Delegate Stewart, our honorary ECM member here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's so great to be home. Great seeing everyone. I know the feeling is extremely mutual. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, for the record, my name is still Delegate Vaughn Stewart, and this is House Bill 317. So this is a pro-fiscal responsibility, pro-business bill that basically says that it's not fair for companies to outbid other companies when they are violating labor laws and not complying with orders to get into compliance. What this bill does is it requires businesses who receive lots of state dollars. So for state economic development assistance, the threshold is $100,000. For state procurement contracts, it's $250,000. So if you're getting a lot of state dollars, we're gonna ask you to check a box every year on July 1st that says that you are in compliance with any final non-appealable orders regarding your labor practices. That's it. So it's one question. You check the box. The vast majority of businesses don't have any issue with this, but for a small minority of businesses that get state dollars, they have violated labor laws. And what this bill says is that if you violate labor laws, you still are eligible to get your public dollars, but that the state could pause public dollars going to companies only if there is a final non-appealable order against them from a court or an agency that they have violated some labor law and that they are not in compliance with the order. So in other words, some order happens, the judge makes a ruling, they say, hey, you should have been paying into 401ks, or hey, all this back money is owed. Oh, you screwed this up, you broke this law. Here's how you come into compliance. Here's the corrective action you must take. The bill is simply saying that the state should be able to pause public dollars going to companies who are not complying with final orders, who are not taking that corrective action. And that every company should just check a box every year. It'll take 5 minutes at most for businesses to certify that they are in compliance with labor laws before they receive taxpayer dollars. This saves taxpayer money because taxpayers should not be on the hook for paying companies who are willfully flouting orders, and it protects honest businesses, the vast majority of whom are abiding by the law, and even if an order was against them, they're doing corrective action. But those businesses who are playing by the rules should not have to compete for bids and for procurement with the very, very small percentage of companies who not only had an order against them again, but who are refusing to comply with the order. That's it. One question every year. Thanks. I urge a favorable report.
Vice Chair Charkoudian.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of the idea. I do think that there's a couple of places where you, like creating where what we want to do is create a level playing field amongst those who are sort of following the rules and those who are not, right? You want a level playing field for this, which it seems like is what you're going for. We want everyone to follow the law. I think I'm just looking at the opposition, which is saying like, you already have to follow the law. So I'm just wondering, I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about like, how is this different? And I guess specifically, is it that we have to have a separate certification, or could you just add to the various other laws that money can be paused? Like, does it have to be a separate process, or could you just go back to where those other laws are enforced and say, like, in addition to whatever other compliance requirements are there, also the state can pause whatever money might be going? So I'm just trying to figure out, like, I think it's a really important thing to do. I'm trying to figure out the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah, totally. Both really good points. So on the first point about whether or not this is sort of duplicative with existing law, what generally happens right now is that a court will make a determination that a company violated some existing law. And then if they don't comply, the penalties for that essentially are holding them into contempt, or the court can issue things like, let's say you have to pay a $10 a day fine until you come into compliance. A court can do a number of things, but those are really slow processes that take a really long time. And what they cannot do, what a court cannot do, is force the state to pause any public disbursements going to the company. So I do think that it's important that even if the company's getting fined, even if the company's being held in contempt, even if there are all these other processes going down in the legal system, I think it's appropriate for the state to still have a mechanism to say, hey, for these ultra extreme violators who broke the law and won't even come into corrective action, we're gonna pause dollars going back to them. We're not gonna claw back. We're not going to terminate the existing contract. We're just going to pause the payments until you come into compliance. I do think that that's an important step. Now, to your second point about the certification, I'm certainly open to a discussion about whether the certification is necessary or not, or whether we can just put a pause on disbursements somewhere in the existing law. The reason I chose the certification is because I want to put the onus on the companies to certify, rather than have the state have to basically survey the docket or look at other information and add essentially a big fiscal note to state actors to determine whether or not people are in compliance or whether they're flouting an order, because sometimes it's not really public information. You have, obviously the final order would be public information, be easy for the state to determine, but it's not always immediately obvious on other public databases whether or not the party is complying.
And so I'm just trying to think about what kind of state money this might be, because in a standard like state procurement, if you have like prevailing wage or something like that, you're looking at certified payroll, that already kind of has the ability to hold money back and then make workers whole if they weren't paid the prevailing wage. Like, that is one example. I'm trying to think about what other kinds of contracts and what other kinds of violations might be envisioned in your bill that, and I wonder if then a similar thing to sort of what we do with prevailing wage law might apply in those other contexts.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think the two other ones that would be most common would be misclassification and child labor laws.
I'm trying to think of what the contract would be that the state would have that wouldn't be a contract that's under prevailing wage.
Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think in some economic development awards, I believe, under some of our economic development programs, would not necessarily have prevailing wage requirements attached.
So like incentives, not a contract with the state, but like you're getting tax credits or you're getting something
Exactly, so this would apply to both the procurement lane and the tax incentive lane.
Okay.
And there are different thresholds.
So with tax incentives then, how would that work? If they're receiving tax incentives, not a cash payment that's going to them, it's money that's not coming in?
Right.
So you can't really, how would you pause that?
I mean, I think.
I want to make it work, that's why.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
asking these questions.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think essentially, they would not be eligible to declare that, their eligibility for the tax incentive on their next tax filing, for as long as they're out of compliance with the order.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of potential. I feel like there's some pieces that hopefully we can work out with amendment to make it implementable.
Sounds good, I appreciate it.
We'll go with Delegate Pippy, then Adams, and then Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, so question, maybe in line with what the Vice Chair was asking, but so the Chamber gave a scenario at the bottom of their testimony in which you have a contractor and then a sub. So if you pause, to kind of simplify it, if you pause payment to the contractor for something that they've, let's say, either intentionally or unintentionally done something wrong, then that prohibits the subs from getting paid who've not done anything wrong. And so, for example, in the construction industry, it's all contract, subcontract. And, in many cases, the contractor is the one just getting the bid, facilitating the money, but the subs are the ones who are actually doing the work, right? So would this bill unintentionally penalize a whole bunch of people doing things correct because of somebody else? Have you thought about that piece?
I did see the letter from the Chamber, and I appreciated their use of the word waterfall consequences, which is a term I had not heard before, but I thought that was evocative, so I'll give credit for them on their testimony writing. Certainly I understand the issue, right? But I think that this would apply in such a narrow portion of cases, and I think that, these contractors, the primes are going to be so large that I don't think that necessarily pausing whatever the state disbursement is going to prevent them from paying their subcontractors. In other words, the companies are large enough businesses where whatever either the procurement that they're getting paid from or the tax incentive, I don't necessarily think they would have to stop payments to the subs. But if there's some sort of hold harmless language or something that we need to put in for that, I'm happy to work with the Chamber to come up with it.
And the only thing I'll say, just for the good of the order, is that generally the way the contracts are written is exactly that. They write it in a way that they're saying if there's any reason that we don't get paid, you don't get paid. And so that's the way the contracts are written. And that would be the thing that's concerning. And I think that's what they're getting at with the letter, is that if you pause payment to the mothership, then everybody who's doing all the work doesn't get paid, and through no fault of their own, quite frankly. And so I don't know if we could figure that piece out. So
yeah, happy to talk more about if there's any sort of lane there that we could fix it.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Delegate Stewart. How are you?
Great to see you. I'm fantastic. How are you?
Well, it feels like Groundhog Day. I see these bills often, and the point is I probably know more about some of this than the average legislator, because I got tangled up in this mess about 12 years ago.
Okay.
And I share with you the business model that has me concerned that I've not had the opportunity to share up to this point, which is that the state of Maryland has this tendency, especially during difficult financial times, to go around and try to find violations, go out in the field and like, hey, who can we get next? And and then here comes the citation for a violation of the law. And what the state of Maryland used to do back under O'Malley was say, okay, you owe us $80,000, but we'll settle for 12. You do 12? No, okay, well, how about 10? And that's how they were balancing budgets. Now, you might ask, well, how do you know that, Chris? The point is because I lived it, all right? And the purpose of me sharing this with you is to say two things and then get your feedback on this. Number one is that the labor laws under the Department of Labor are some of the strongest departmental regulations that exist. There are debarment provisions that exist within the state of Maryland. So the state of Maryland can and surely does debar contractors for serious violations, for which I think you're probably trying to get at this. But the other thing that I wanted to share with you and get your comment on, aside from the debarment part, which means I think we already do this under Maryland law, is to say that there is the lens of a bill like this where you're trying to do something and it's already covered under the contracts that the prime contractor engages in. So in other words, a prime contractor that does work under state procurement contracts has to put in their, because they're signing the contract, and then they're applying that same provision to all their subcontractors, that they have to follow state law. So you might imagine I've seen a contract or two where this provision exists, and so if you violate if the subcontractor violates that contract that they sign, that they in essence run the risk of terminating that contract. In other words, the prime contractor can say, well, shucks, if you've violated a major labor law, I might have to terminate you not only for convenience, but because it's required by the state. So how about if I get those two answers from you and your thoughts as you are bringing a bill like this?
Sure. So I don't know exactly what the standard is for debarment, if that's your first question.
Serious violations of labor law.
Right. So this is aimed at something a little bit distinct from just very serious or willful violations or something like that. This is aimed rather not at violators, but violators who refuse to take corrective action. So to your example, let's say I entered into some sort of payment plan or settlement agreement with the O'Malley administration for some kind of violation that they maybe were unduly aggressive with or whatever, and I agree to pay $10,000. As long as I've entered into some sort of payment plan and I'm paying that back, or I have paid it back, or I'm working with them to do so, that would not fall under any sort of pause provision in this bill, which is not targeted, again, at people who violate labor laws, which I assume also the debarment provisions are targeted at, but rather people who are not taking corrective action. Because what we've seen is, again, a very, very small minority of companies, a much smaller minority than just companies who violated the law in some way or entered into a settlement agreement. A very small minority of companies are having orders against them from an agency or a court, and then they're not even compliant. And the existing penalty enforcement regime for that is basically just civil contempt proceedings, which are very time intensive. I mean, very lengthy period to get that. You have to go through a very lengthy process. And in the meantime, taxpayers would have been footing the bill for this company that may have been out of step with corrective action requirements for years. To your second question about what was
it's already under contract.
It's already in the contract. Well, certainly, yeah. So for subs, of course, they have to comply with existing labor laws.
No, I'm sorry. The prime contractor has to comply because they're putting these provisions in their contracts with their subcontractors.
Right. So, but again, this is a little bit distinct. I'm familiar with those types of provisions that they're certifying compliance with laws. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about they're in compliance with labor law currently. They have violated the law in the past, but they're not taking corrective action pursuant to that order.
And I'm saying that the contracts that subcontractors sign already make provision. Let me ask one final question, which in this example that leads me to why I'm in the legislature, we fought and won this, by the way. So there were some egregious actions taken by government, and I saw it happen in real time. And
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
They could have put us out of business, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Workplace Fraud Act specifically has the special notion that an administrative action by the commissioner can find somebody in guilt of that particular law, and they provide what's called the rebuttable presumption, which is to say, okay, well, we'll give you the courtesy of showing up in front of an administrative law judge and try to prove your innocence, which is kind of opposite to what due process should look like, et cetera, et cetera. But in the case of many of these small businesses, if they don't act on that citation in 15 days, maybe they don't realize that becomes a final order immediately, and they lose their ability to fight these things. And so when you start throwing these additional obligations on to small businesses that perhaps don't understand the weight of some of these laws and the violations that relate to it, are you worried that you're going to tangle in good small business people that make honest mistakes in a way that perhaps the state of Maryland should not be intentionally going after that sort of thing? In other words, don't you really think Department of Labor has the ability to do some pretty strong, aggressive actions against these sort of things, free of this additional layer of protections that you're trying to add?
So I thought seriously about the small business perspective, and I thought seriously about errors or mistakes that are put in these certification forms that are not intentional. And I think if you go through all the provisions of the bill, I tried to put several in there around how only basically willful misrepresentations on the certification form would trigger any sort of consequences. So if a small business or any business just mistakenly said that they were indeed in compliance with all final non-appealable orders, and they were just mistaken.
So a willful violation of the Workplace Fraud Act is $20,000 per violation per worker. $20,000 times a company that perhaps had 6 or 7 workers on a job could be worth $100,000, $200,000. You don't think that's strong enough?
Listen, I think.
I'm listening.
I think the labor laws are strong. There are some other, updates that we can make. My issue is not companies having deterrents from committing violations. My issue is that there are some companies who violate the law, who a court rules against, who they appeal, they lose the appeal, and then they still are getting public dollars, and this is something that's happened in real life. I'm not gonna name the companies, but there are real companies out there for whom it was not a substantial deterrent, not violating the law in the first instance, but the deterrents that are in place for not pursuing corrective action on those orders.
I'll leave you with this. I understand in a business environment where you're bidding and you want fair bidding practices, you want each contractor to sort of play by the rules. And so on some level, I understand what your bill's trying to get at. You want fair, equitable bidding practices. What I'm saying to you is that the Department of Labor, I believe we oftentimes underestimate how strong that department is. It is one of the strongest regulatory departments we have in the state of Maryland. And I would argue over a Diet Coke after our work today, find one that's more regulatory burdensome and the penalty provisions being as heavy-handed as the Department of Labor for which your bill aims. And I would just ask you to think about that. Thank you.
I will think about that, and I will absolutely share a Diet Coke with you whenever you want. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to ask but I think you kind of allude in your last answer that you may not be willing to share. I was just wondering, what was it that brought you to the point to bring this bill?
Sure, yeah, I don't want to blow up any companies, but there has been some publicly reported practices where basically there are some companies who made some labor law violations who then had to go through a very lengthy contempt process in order to get them to take the corrective action they were required to under the law. And while that was happening, Maryland taxpayers were paying them. That is the impetus for the bill.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you. I was just, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate.
I don't see any further questions, Delegate Stewart.
Until next time.
We do have some unfavorables.
Thanks.
Grayson Wiggins and Sean Malone.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. On behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors, my name is Sean Malone, testifying in opposition to the bill. But it's not really an opposition because I disagree with the intent of the bill, much to what the Vice Chair said. If there are contractors who have been adjudicated to be in violation and are just in contempt, we should find a way for them not to continue to receive state funds. And, I take the delegate at his word that there may have been instances of that, but the way our laws are set up, prevailing wage law is set up, it strongly encourages the settlement of these actions without any contested hearing. And in fact, I think the Department of Labor tells you it's very rare that they go to a contested hearing because it doesn't make sense. If you go to a contested hearing, you're subjected to double or triple wages, you're subjected to attorney's fees, you're subjected to a finding of willful neglect. So even if a contractor is not violated, they often will settle. So I don't think this is occurring much. I also think having all look, in worker misclassification, according to the Department of Labor's own report, they found one willful violation of 500 visits. So to make all contractors, and they have a 94% compliance rate is what they found, even with when you add in unknowing violations. So I think the Department of Labor has the capacity to notify DGS about a contractor is a bad actor in this rare circumstance. And then I'd be happy to work with the delegate or the committee on the appropriate way to withhold funding from them. But there is a problem currently under a general contractor would have money withheld potentially because they're jointly and several liable for something a second, third tier sub has done, and that will affect everybody. I think there's a way to do this. I just don't think that this bill the language gets us there. With that, we testify in opposition as drafted.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. I'll echo Sean's thoughts. And to the question earlier, we do view this as a web of liability where you have the potential for one business to negatively impact a lot of good actors, not only businesses, but workers as well. I would just note, I don't read the bill as there's been a lot of discussion about workplace classification. I don't read the bill as just specific to the construction industry. The way that the bill has defined economic development assistance is exceptionally broad. So I think this would cover, really many nonprofits, many companies who do not operate in the construction industry. And so, again, weaving that web of liability through all of those companies and placing them at the really subject to the actions of a general contractor or the business that receives economic development assistance, we think is just it's ripe for unintended negative consequences, and for that reason we're opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. So in our committee we have economic development as a subcommittee, and I see that the bill title relates to economic development. Now, for all these years, we've had labor law and we've had Department of Labor, these type of bills come through, and they've been sent to another committee. So my only question is, are we seeing...
I really miss you there, too.
What's that?
I really miss you there, too.
Yes, absolutely. And I miss myself being there because my question kind of goes to, aren't there a lot of fresh, new bills and ideas that relate to labor law for which the legislature may pass at the same time we're passing a bill here that seems to apply to these things, yet our committee isn't benefiting from some of the testimony that we're hearing on bills that relate to labor that's in another committee. I just thought we may not have one. I just feel like I'm a little in a different posture than I was last year on these sort of subjects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, we spent 2 hours on a worker classification bill just last week in the new committee. This is also, there was discussion about incentives. We passed a bill last year that had, it's a fair labor or a good labor incentive on procurement contracts. So that was just put forth last year, and it was in the governor's bill, and it passed out of HGO and became law. And so I think to the extent that discussion occurred, that issue's been addressed, and that policy is in place.
And currently under prevailing wage, if you have a judgment against you, well, actually, based on the complaint, they can withhold the money. The public body's notified to withhold the money that's contested already. So the money should be held. I just, look, in what the delegate described, someone who's been adjudicated to have violated. Now, this bill actually talks about settling, which is concerning because we want the worker to get paid. We want an incentive to settle. So that's been the purpose. But in the case where someone's adjudicated, delegate, I think we should have a mechanism if the Department of Labor is having trouble in collecting. Although the fiscal notes, there will be no increase to revenues as a result of this bill. I'm not sure Department of Labor has numbers that would say that this is happening at a high level. I'd be surprised if even 4% of cases are contested.
Right. Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 317. We'll now move on to Delegate Ziegler with House Bill 461. Yes, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. Chair Valderrama, Vice Chair Charkoudian, and esteemed members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Natalie Ziegler here with House Bill 461, which would establish the Rural Readiness Program and the Rural Maryland Capacity Building Fund. So the program will serve as a one-stop shop for nonprofits and small towns seeking funding and expertise for projects they're hoping to develop. Across Maryland, much of our economic development funding is delivered through competitive grants. But to qualify, jurisdictions are expected to produce analyses, infrastructure plans, pro formas, et cetera. But while urban and suburban localities often have full-time staff and dedicated grant writers to handle that, rural communities and nonprofits usually do not. So they may lack the capacity even to apply for grants. HB 461 would create a program in the Rural Maryland Council that could provide that expertise. And the Capacity Building Fund will provide specialized individual grant awards up to $50,000 to assist with preliminary work such as site planning that is needed for a project to move forward. So to give you a real-life example, the mayor of the aptly named Grantsville, a very small town in northern Garrett County, is trying to build a community center, which would be revenue positive. They own the land, they have architectural drawings, but they need $2.5 million to build it. So they were unaware that they actually qualify for new market tax credits, something the Rural Maryland Council identified for them. But they will need help writing a business plan and pro forma to get a loan, and that's something this program could help them with. So the suggested pilot funding is just $100,000, but it could help communities all over rural Maryland with economic development and projects ranging from broadband to housing. So with that, I respectfully request a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Charlotte Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Rural Maryland Council. We're an independent state agency located in the Maryland Department of Agriculture. We administer the Rural Maryland Prosperity Investment Fund and the Maryland Agriculture Education and Rural Development Assistance Fund. Last year, in fiscal year 2026, we received over 170 applications requesting over $14 million in assistance. Of those, we were able to fund 62 and of about $5.5 million. So that meant 110 did not get funding. And of those, we would say about 10 to 20, they're great ideas, but they just did not have, they were just not ready. Things like we don't understand if they have site control. Do they have permitting? What are their construction timelines? For the nonprofits, it's usually like how many board members do they have? Do they have a strategic plan? Does their mission fit what they're asking to do? So we want to create this program as an early development stage to assist those small towns that don't have the access to resources that some of the other areas do. And we think that this is technical assistance is the best way to help support these entities. So we see this as a cohort program, not only to bring these folks together with providers and resources, but also with each other so we can learn from each other. And we're just trying to bring those resources, expertise to those small entities that otherwise don't have access to resources. With that, we ask for your favorable support of House Bill 461. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Dr. William Reed, and on behalf of the Rural Maryland Council and Frederick County Progressives, I support HB 461, the Rural Readiness Program and the Rural Maryland Capacity Building Fund. As what's already been said, HB 461 is important because it addresses a challenge many rural communities face, not lack of idea, but lack of capacity. Too often, rural communities are expected to compete for grants and economic development opportunities without planning resources, staffing, or technical support needed to succeed. This bill recognizes that readiness matters. 461 establishes the Rural Readiness Program administered by the Rural Maryland Council to help rural communities build the capacity they need before pursuing major funding opportunities. In practice, this means providing technical assistance, training, planning, support, so communities can assess their strengths and gaps, improve governance and financial readiness, and identifies realistic priorities. Communities that finish the program demonstrate that they are prepared to responsibly manage public funds and carry projects forward. Prioritizing these communities for certain grants is smart, accountable use of taxpayer dollars. The bill also establishes the Rural Maryland Capacity Building Fund. which works hand in hand with the Rural Readiness Program. While the Readiness Program focuses on preparation, the Capacity Building Fund provides the resources needed to move from planning to action. These grants support collaborative planning, regional partnerships, organizational strengthening, and coordination across local governments and nonprofits. Together, these programs create a pipeline. First, communities build readiness, then they receive targeted funds to strengthen capacity and implement plans. This approach reduces the risk for stalled projects, unused grant funds, and missed opportunities. On behalf of the Rural Maryland Council and Frederick County Progressives, I request a favorable support of HB 461, excuse me.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Alice Settle Raskin, and I'm a resident of Western Howard County near Mount Airy, Maryland. My background includes working for two organizations who've promoted economic growth through tools provided via grants and technical assistance. The Housing Assistance Council, it's a rural nonprofit. It's a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., who advocates for and builds homes and communities in rural America, including Maryland, and for the Howard County Economic Development Authority, promoting the county and Maryland as a place to live, work, have a business, and raise a family. When traveling through our state, I often take byways, traveling through our small towns. This way, I get to know my state and not just breeze by the highway exits. I look at what and who made these towns click, what the economic drivers are, and how some of these towns and communities surround them that once thrived are now dying into obscurity. I look at the reasons why, whether by natural or man-made disasters or by our once vibrant, aging population, and by the out-migration of our youth, our prized next generation. HB 461 will bring back our rural communities by providing better access to funding to help them plan, organize, and prepare them in a stronger position to obtain state, federal, or private funding. It can make a direct positive impact on these communities through downtown revitalization, workforce development programs, and community centers. On behalf of the Rural Maryland Council and as a lifelong Marylander, I respectfully request your favorable support of HB 461. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine's a quick question. Thanks for the bill. It's very interesting. You had one favorable with comments from the, I think it was called the Nature Conservancy, the ask that you add long-term climate resilience planning in the things that could be, get grants for. Is that something amenable?
I would argue that that's probably already in there. Am I correct about that in the sense that for many small towns, critical infrastructure is just a huge part of the kinds of projects they need help with? But let me ask the Rural Maryland Council about that.
Yeah, I believe it's pretty vague related to what the technical assistance, because it's going to depend on the entity and the small town. We certainly have been supportive of our small towns accessing things like energy efficiency programs as well. We see energy as one of the largest costs, so we wouldn't be opposed to that. We were trying to keep it vague to make sure we could cover all the available aspects.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions for your panel. Thank you, Delegate Ziegler. We have more favorable: Richard Reinhardt, Charlotte Fleckenstein, Claudia Wilson Randall, and Raymond Morris.
Ladies first. Ladies first.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Wilson-Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. And I'm happy to be here today speaking in favor of House Bill 461. You have my written testimony, but I just want to speak about the work that the Community Development Network has done with Rural Maryland Council. Over the last 2 years, the Community Development Network has done some work specifically focusing on community economic development in rural Maryland. And so through that, we produced a rural housing guide and provided direct assistance to community organizations throughout the state of Maryland. While this work was very rewarding, there was a constant theme throughout it, which is that many towns and rural communities lack the operating support in order to complete projects or even take on projects. And so it was very hard, and it continues to be a challenge for many areas to recruit the needed expertise, talent, in order to complete projects. So I'm very excited about the opportunity for this bill because our state needs economic development, urban, suburban, rural. And without economic growth throughout our state, I think we're in a very dark time. So I'm very excited to support House Bill 461, and I urge your favor report. Thank you so much.
All right. Hello again, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Charlotte Fleckenstein with MACO testifying in support of House Bill 461. I'll keep it brief because you've heard from the previous panel about some of the great things that this bill could do for our rural communities, and you have my written testimony as well. I will just add from a county perspective, local governments would very much appreciate the tools and support that this bill would offer. The program and its complementary fund proactively address several challenges that our rural communities face and provide a lot of targeted support to help them compete more economically in the long term. So as such, MACO is respectfully urging a favorable report on House Bill 461. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Great to see you all again. For the record, Richard Reinhardt with Percy Public Affairs. I apologize, Mayor Ray Morris, who we represent for the city of Cumberland, he had an emergency meeting back in Allegheny County. But with me also today in the audience here is Wes Hines from the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. He's the executive director and has been the executive director for the last 6 years. They were here to testify and show just the support of this bill because that's how much it's going to mean for them as both nonprofits and municipalities in Western Maryland. I think, you know, as my colleagues in this panel have said, and the panel before spoke very eloquently what this bill can do and what it will provide. Certainly for my clients, for the Scenic Railroad, when it comes to workforce development, infrastructure, you know, seeing workforce growth in their organization, same with the city of Cumberland. We also represent the city of Frostburg. All of those things are detailed in the greatness of this bill and what these funds will be providing for municipalities and nonprofits alike, for particularly in these rural areas. It's necessary. We greatly appreciate the effort and the collaboration by both the bipartisanship of the committee, the council, then the sponsors of the bill, and certainly the panels here. We strongly urge that this committee pass this legislation, and we certainly hope to see you out in Western Maryland to either ride the train, to enjoy the Polar Express, or just to come out to see the wonderful areas that we have to offer for the state. For that, Matt, I will conclude if you have any questions, but we urge a favorable report.
Thank you. And Richard, did you say Mr. Morris was not here?
Mr. Morris, yes, Mayor Ray Morris, he had to go back to Allegheny County for an emergency meeting, so I apologize.
Okay. So I see no questions for your panel. Thank you very much for your testimony this afternoon. Members, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 461. We will now move on to our last bill of the day, House Bill 487. I know Delegate Feldmark is not here to present, but does she have some? Okay. And Tedco is here, I believe. Okay.
Sorry.
Good afternoon, Chair Valderrama, Vice Chair Charkoudian, members of the Economic Matters Committee.
My name is Jackson O'Mara, and I'm Chief of Staff to Delegate Jessica Feldmark. Thank you for the opportunity to present HB 487. She presents her regrets she's not able to be here today, but thanks you for all the well wishes she's received. HB 487 provides authority for TEDCO to adopt additional regulations related to the responsibilities of TEDCO's investment committee, specifically the development of a process for considering and pursuing remedies for investments that no longer meet the definition of a qualified business. The legislation also provides additional remedies other than divestment for an investment that TEDCO holds over 15 years. This change modifies the current punitive approach to the TEDCO portfolio, companies that fall out of compliance with the Qualified Maryland Business Criteria due to growth and/or M&A activity and other related events, allowing TEDCO more latitude in liquidating an investment that no longer meets the statutory definition of a Maryland-based firm. This change allows a more controlled exit and better enhances TEDCO returns for state money. Providing a more controlled exit also helps to offset negative outcomes for the growing startup company when appropriate and under the oversight of the investment committee of TEDCO's board. Thank you for your consideration, and Delegate Feldmark respectfully requests a favorable report.
Thank you. Thank you. First, thank you for being here, and prayers to Delegate Feldmark. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, good seeing you again. We talked about this a little bit when I came here before to testify that, again, if a company becomes, for all the good things that they go off and they grow or they acquire some and they become no longer Maryland qualified, we have to immediately liquidate. And that liquidation is a challenge for that entrepreneur. It's a challenge for TEDCO, and it creates situations, frankly, where we have had companies not take our money because they knew that clause existed in our investment document. So we do ask for your consideration and approval of this change. Again, we're not looking to make investments outside the state. We're trying to help facilitate even greater growth of these companies that are started here, and we want to stay here in Maryland. So thank you, and we do support and want a fair response. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I don't see any questions. Please give our regards to Delegate Feldmark, and we look forward to seeing her soon. With that said, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 487. That concludes the bill hearings for this afternoon. Members, we do have an event at 7 p.m. this evening. If you don't know where it is, you can ask Ms. Joy, but I hope to see you guys there. And again, not mandated, but I'm sure we'd like to support our firefighters. We're adjourned.